little table that you could put in front of you?
You don't need their dates of birth and stuff. You have that.
Well, we have it here, but if you
Yeah.
want to mention it,
I don't remember. I will.
you know. Do you need your
I don't
glasses?
think you need that.
I'm Emilyn Kogan, and I'm going to be interviewing Edythe Siegel today for the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County. We have the pleasure of having this interview from Edythe to add to our archives for the Oral History Committee that's doing this. And we thank you very much, Edythe, for permitting us to enter your home.
You're quite welcome.
Okay.
We may as well start with your family background. Where were you born?
I was born in Rochester, New York, where my parents were born.
Your parents were born there
Yes.
also? How about their parents?
They came from, well, my grandmother said whoever won the war, they were Russian, German, or Polish.
And whose mother was that?
That was my father's mother.
And when did she come to this country?
Oh, they came in the 1880s.
Okay, was she married at that time?
Yes, she was married.
And did they have any children that they
had
came with
about-
them?
Yeah, they had about 13 altogether, but they didn't all survive. Just about.
Were they born in Europe?
Only one was born in Europe.
Okay. So your father was born?
No, the 13, there were only, and the one that came over was born in Europe. Then there were about 5 that were born here.
Oh, okay. And where did they come to when they came over here?
Came right to Rochester.
They did.
My grandmother had a brother here. He owned a clothing factory.
That was why they came?
Yeah.
And did they leave Europe for a particular reason, other than that they already had
Well,
relatives here?
1880 were the pogroms.
Okay. And your mother's family?
The same time.
Okay.
Same time.
And what made them come to
Same
Rochester?
reason.
Hmm?
Same reason.
Right, but why did they choose Rochester to settle in?
Rochester was the clothing industry.
And both your grandparents were in the clothing
No,
industry?
actually, one grandfather was he went back and forth to Europe, which was unusual for those days. He was in import-export. And then ultimately they had a grocery store. As I understand, it was out of their house.
And did they speak English or Russian or?
No, they
Yiddish?
all spoke English.
They did?
Yes,
yeah.
they did.
Did they speak Yiddish at all, or Jewish?
Very little. They, not what everybody says so we would understand. No, they would speak it so we would understand.
Oh, okay. So they pretty much learned English as soon as they came to this country?
They must have.
Your
Unless they-
grandparents?
I don't know
But
what-
you didn't know of any other language they spoke in the house?
Well, they spoke Yiddish.
Oh, they did?
Sometimes, but they didn't speak regularly Yiddish. They mostly spoke English, all of them.
And you had siblings that,
I had one sister 2 years older than myself.
and you both grew up in Rochester?
Mhm.
And you went to school there?
We went to the same grammar school that my mother went to. My father, unfortunately, I would say he had lower education instead of the higher education that we had, because his father died when he was middle-aged, and the mother was left with all these children, so they grew up, as many children in Rochester did, they grew up in an orphan asylum until the parents could get them back.
Did you find any anti-Semitism while you were growing up in Rochester?
The usual.
Well, when you say the usual, what do
Well,
you
at
mean?
age 5, the children come home from Sunday school and they let us know that we killed Christ and we don't know what they're talking about. You know, your little best friend from next door comes home and tells you that, and that's the end of the friendship. And I'm sure there was anti-Semitism. Do you want to know about? You don't want to know other things that would go on and on and on.
Well, was it something that affected you and your family a great deal or not?
I don't know. I think we took it in our stride.
Okay. How about when you went to high school there?
Well, you know what I think about anti-Semitism in high school? It's a funny thing. we were all good friends in classes and in high school. But we never danced, and when we had the school dances, I never danced with a non-Jewish boy till I went to college. Oh, there was a boy on the street I danced with because he was a good friend, and we used to practice. He went to Catholic school, and his mother used to stand in her house and look very worried. I don't know. She thought we were just pals. I was telling him about my boyfriends, and he was telling me about his girlfriends.
And are there any particular childhood memories you have that you'd like to share? You know, from when you were in Rochester?
Well, I think I had a very fortunate growing up because we went 4 months of the year. We called down to the beach. We were in the same schools that we transferred schools for 4 months out of the year, from May to November. That was the only escape hatch my parents had because we were in this shtetl neighborhood. And we tried to, my dad, he had a business like Stanford House Wrecking. And he put the furniture on the truck, and we bought a house. And my grandmother started to cry because she didn't want to leave her cronies. So we put the furniture back on, and we went back to the old neighborhood. And we never moved so-called up, you know, to a better neighborhood. With I think the school is probably perfectly wonderful in the other neighborhood, because the editor of the New York Times came out of it, and some of the leading Zionists in the world came out of that little neighborhood. But yeah, eventually we moved, and I went to Monroe High, which is supposedly, you know, a better neighborhood.
And that was in Rochester?
Yeah, and my parents bought this house with Tiffany glass windows for $3,000 in 1940.
And when you finished Monroe High School, where did you go on to college?
I went to University of Wisconsin, journalism, Madison, and I had a ball. I belonged to a Jewish sorority, and it was a wonderful education and lots of fun. And I never minded the cold because I was used to it from. I didn't know any better.
Right.
I was used to it from Rochester.
Rochester is cold. Right. And you graduated from the University of Wisconsin.
Yes.
Yeah. What did you study there?
Journalism.
And then you went to work in that field, in journalism?
Let me see. Yes, I did, and then my father died when I was 22. We had this furniture business, and I had to manage it. My mother just had me.
So you went back to
22
Rochester
years
then?
old. No, I was in Rochester all the time. Yeah, I had been a reporter, and so my mother needed me, so I managed the business for a year and a half. And then I came down I was junior Hadassah president, and I never read the literature because I always thought we should do original programming. One day, I was going through some things, and I read something about a trip to Israel, so I came down and said, Mom, I'm going to Israel, just like that.
Now this was after you graduated?
After I graduated.
When did you graduate from
I
Wisconsin?
graduated in 47.
Okay.
But when I told her I was coming down, she didn't miss the beach. She said, fine, I'll get Mike to come in to take care of the store. That was my brother-in-law.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, she was great. She
That's
never missed a
huge.
beat. She never missed a beat. And that trip encompassed going to Hebrew University for 8 weeks. I had Martin Buber and every scholar you could name in English. There were children there, students from all the Ivies and whatever, and many of them took Martin Buber, etc., in Hebrew. So I thought, oh my God, if I ever had children, what a wonderful education. And then when we moved here, I didn't even know bicultural existed when we moved here. And so we lucked it. I was very happy that they were able to get that kind of an education.
So how long were you in Israel?
Well, I was there 3.5 months. I stayed on because I was going to make Aliyah, and then I couldn't cut the cord because my mother had just been widowed, and I just couldn't do it. So I went through Europe, and I had people every place except Paris, and then there I had friends. The only place I went to a hotel was in Paris, and then in London I had family, stayed with them.
But when you first went to Israel, you traveled on your own?
Well, it was with a group.
But with,
It was
but
with a
you
group.
did you have friends that you were traveling with?
Well, I made friends. No, there wasn't. Well, there was one boy from Rochester that was on another program, he would come to visit. But no, not in that particular
Right.
program.
Where did you meet your husband?
I met my husband, our planes crossed, because he came November 1950, or October 1950, when I left, and then we met 5 years later. He was, after he graduated college, he was an American expert in Israel.
An American expert?
American expert, yeah. And then so I said, so why didn't you marry an Israeli girl? He said, I didn't like to explain my jokes for the rest. I didn't want to explain my jokes for the rest of my life. So I got him in 6 months.
Well, that was,
He was ready.
So when did you marry him? What year were you married?
Oh, I guess it was 7.5 months later after I met him. I met him through a sorority sister's mother.
Whose mother?
A sorority
Oh,
sister's mother from
sorority
Wisconsin.
Right.
They were from
oh,
Wisconsin. They met him in Washington and sent him to me.
Okay. And you married him
He was
shortly
from
after?
Washington, needless to say.
And where did you live after you were married?
Greenwich Village. And I lived in a neighborhood that my uncle described, when he told people about it, he said, Edie lives in a neighborhood where everybody has 2 dogs.
And how long did you live there?
That must be, I bet that's Sarah. We lived there, well, that was 55, we came here in 61. And I always say we got the bill for nurseries, for Bank Street Nursery School. So we decided it was time to go. The bill was $200.
That was in New York.
Yeah.
Yeah. So who was born in New York?
Debbie and Kayla were born in New York. And Sarah's my Stanford native.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what year was she born?
She was born 65. 65. Yeah. The other 2 were armistice babies. One was November 11th, American armistice, and Kayla was Israeli armistice. And Sarah missed Bastille Day by 1 day.
Now, when you were living in Stanford, how did it compare to what type of life you had in New York or Rochester, for that matter?
Well, oddly enough, in New York, both in New York and Rochester had a very identified Jewish life. When Debbie was in nursery school, I came home, I said, Herm, I met this woman, she's got a vivid imagination. She told me she lives in an 18-room townhouse, and you should see her. She's what we used to call a beau. Well, she did live in an 18-room townhouse, and she was married to a neurosurgeon, and she just came looking like that. You know how you fall out of bed when you have to bring the kids for orientation to nursery school. And she was an incredible friend, oh my God. And she was very, very Jewish. I got into America Israel Culture Foundation through her, and Carmel Hadassah, and I can't even tell you all the things. She would have parties. It was a very interesting life because she would have parties during the week, and they were even better than the she called them soirees, whatever. They were salons really. She was very fancy actually, when she got dressed up.
So
And
really,
it was quite a life. When she died, she left money for a party, and they had a jazz band. It was at the National Arts Club at Gramercy Park.
so she really had an effect on how you
She really
related
did.
to Stanford.
How what?
How you were related to living
Well,
here in
no,
Stanford.
related in Stanford. I found Stanford a wasteland Jewishly when I came here.
Right.
the
How long
beginning.
after you met her? How long?
Oh, well, I met her, we were friends all the time in New York. She
you
she
knew
wasn't
this
my
one-
only friend, but...
Oh,
But I had we had a very interesting life there. And when we came here, my college roommate lived in Stanford, and she said, I want you to visit. And she had a realtor in the driveway when we came. She said, I want you to live here. But the first dinner party we went to, I thought I would platz.
can I? So the
Yeah.
woman that
It's
you
about Jewish.
but
okay.
the woman that you were talking to, who
Yeah.
lived in the 19-room house,
18.
18. Okay. Was that in Manhattan?
Yeah.
Oh,
It-
okay.
Only two people
Because
lived in it. It was like something like the Peter Stuyvesant.
Oh, okay,
something like
so
that.
she-
Oh, it was the Stanford White House.
Stanford?
Sanford.
Oh,
Sanford White House,
right.
yeah.
Do you want to add their names to the?
Well,
You
I
can.
hadn't had her on the original list, but with Sherwood and Ruth Jacobson.
Okay, because you're going to have a copy of this too, so,
But she won't, she's gone.
but your family will remember.
Yeah, of course they do. She played guitar, and
And-
she was an entertainer with a friend, with an Israeli friend, and she would come for all the parties and play for the kids.
So then and she continued to be your friend when you moved
Oh,
up
yeah,
here.
yeah.
And you started to tell me how Stanford was like.
Oh, it was a wasteland. I couldn't believe it that there were so many. We had looked in Fourbrooks and luckily didn't get it. The house we wanted, we didn't get. I think we would have suffocated in it. Everybody was intermarried, and nobody. They were unidentified. I don't care whether not necessarily unaffiliated, but they really weren't identified. There was a turn in 1967 when people decided it was okay to be Jewish after the 6-Day War. I don't know if you remember that. There was a great big change in Stanford.
So when you came in 61, there was
Very little,
very little.
very
And
little.
did the children, were they in nursery school when you came up here or in public school?
Let me see. No, Debbie was in kindergarten, and Kathy was 2.5. Kathy was no, she wasn't in nursery school yet.
Right. And when they went, did they go to public school here in Stanford? Or
We started in public school, and I went to observe, and the kids were reading. I said, "Oh, we moved here to get away from private school." I said, they're only going to. He always said this. They're only going to go this way once. So, but I really did want the Jewish education because I felt the Hebrew didn't take with me. My parents tried to give me, private lessons, and they didn't take. And I thought it was a great idea to have that kind of an education.
So when did they start?
So Debbie started in first grade.
Oh.
Yeah.
So at that point, they didn't have any problems with anti-Semitism because they were in a
No, not
bicultural
because of
school.
that, but they had the same thing that their mother had at the same age.
Oh.
One day there were some neighbors and they started with whole business.
Oh.
But one of the children, I'll never forget her, she stood up for Debbie. But it was the same New Dirty Jew who
Right.
killed our Christ. And I think that may have, by that time, it was the third generation
Now,
with that lovely libel.
when you and Herman got married, what was he doing at the time? You said he was from Washington, D.C.?
He was a toy designer. He was an industrial designer of toys. Ultimately, well, he worked in Israel too. He had a very interesting time in Israel. But when he ultimately became a vice president and was the last.
Here in Stanford?
Yeah, we had an interval where he was unemployed for 2.5 years, and then he got a vice presidency, and he was going to China, and all over Europe and all over. And his mother lived in Israel, so there was some kind of, I forgot what they called it. He could get a free trip to Israel every time he went any place, and he would be able to see his mother when he went on these business trips.
And his name?
Herman Max Siegel, Chaim Mordecai Siegel.
So when he started to work again, he was working for a company, also a toy company?
Where?
When he went to China and...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's when he was the vice president.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've always lived in this house?
Yeah, since 61.
Right. Now, were you affiliated with any temples or synagogues here in...
Yeah, I guess we paid dues like 3 places for years, and we helped start the Chavarot.
Oh.
Before Mark Gallup. In fact, we were in the group that got Mark Gallup. And then that group split, and I got them the rabbi for the Fellowship for Jewish Learning. And it split.
So who was the rabbi then when they split the fellowship?
They didn't have one.
Oh, they didn't have one.
It was an outgrowth of the split.
Right. Did you stay with the fellowship?
Oh, yeah, we were with the fellowship for a long time, until our children made us quit.
Okay. And you mentioned your friend that you met in New York, who was a significant impression on you. How about your roommate?
Well, I wanted to mention the one from Rochester that was the most,
Well, go
the
ahead.
most significant. one.
Absolutely.
My very best friend, it was a actually it was a fourth generation friendship. Our grandparents were friends, our mothers were friends, we were friends, and our children. So by the third generation, anyway, I came back from Israel, and she said, Edythe, I had been her maid of honor at her wedding before I left her. She says, Edythe, you've got to sit down and write. You'll never do it if you don't do it now. You come every day to my house, and you write. And what I did was, I went to her house, I'd throw on my blue jeans, go to her house and write, and she would edit it and critique it. And as a result of that, I wrote a full-page article for the Times-Union in Rochester about, if you can believe it, in 1950, many, many Rochesterians had already made Aliyah. Aliyah means that they'd settled in Israel. So I had all their pictures and stories about every one of them. And as a result of that, I was offered a job as an editor of a Jewish paper. And then it went on and on and on and on. And from that article, that full-page article, I got a call. Somebody did an institutional radio broadcast. They dialogued that article. And when I went to New York, when I was looking for a job, I found out it had been picked up as the best institutional ad of that year, and they got a prize. But in that, what I was happy about, in that article, I added to it that when people came to collect tzedakah, Jewish charity, my father would thank them for coming, and they'd say, what are you thanking us for? You gave us some money. He said, no, I didn't give you money. I paid my life insurance.
So when you were a journalist, when you were in Rochester also, when you said you wrote for the Rochester Times, was that a newspaper?
Times-Union, yeah, right.
Right, yeah. And what else did you do? Related to journalism or?
Well, I think the most significant thing I ever did, and the greatest opportunity I ever had, I was working, my father said it has been and never was. Well, I was and never was. My brother-in-law always said if there was a Jewish nun, Edythe would have been a Jewish nun. So anyway, I was offered, and I have the telegram because nobody would believe it. I was offered a job at Life magazine, and instead went to work for ADL for a while. So ultimately, I was working for ZOA. When I worked for ZOA, I got this opportunity to do the first
Now, COA?
Z,
Oh,
Science
ZOA,
Organization of
okay.
America. I got this wild opportunity to do the first trade show that was ever done in America for Israeli fashions. It wasn't a Hadassah show. It went to New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. And the thing that was, I had a ball writing the script, and I did get Life magazine coverage, et cetera, et cetera. I got very good coverage for them.
When did this happen?
This was, well, like in the 50s.
Oh, so you weren't married yet?
No.
Yeah.
So what was really the thrill for me was my girlfriend, my best girlfriend in Israel, who, when she was getting her master's, I was going around with her. She was doing research for her master's, and I was doing research for articles. When I was in Israel that time after I stayed, after the stint, she happened to, and then she became head of sociology at Bar Ilan. Well, she was over in the States when I was doing this show, and my boss let my girlfriend and my mother sit with the Consul General of Israel. So that was a big thrill.
That must have been very exciting.
Yeah, that
for
was
you, too.
really sad.
Did you continue any of the writings after you moved to Stanford?
Very little. Very little. I did add, when my husband was unemployed, we started a lamp business. So I did the copy and PR and stuff like that. And because I came up with the idea of selling to a lot of catalogs because I didn't want Sarah to come home alone. The other two kids were gone. So I did that. And one year I got a free I got a whole year of tuition for her by doing something for a school.
That was good.
Yeah, it was good.
And what school was that?
It was Early Learning Center.
Oh, so it was a nursery school.
Yeah, it was a nursery school.
And did you belong to any community groups here in Stamford?
Yeah, I did. We were very active at the Stanford Museum. And I started Museum on Tour. And my husband, well, he was on the art exhibition committee. And the most significant thing he did was he did an industrial design show in the little studio. He brought a car in, he brought a Fiat in it, and he brought that new, there were at that time these cylindrical mobile things, whatever. It was a great show. So I called the editor of industrial design to come and see it. And lo and behold, when we went down to Washington, he copied the show exactly
Now,
at the Smithsonian.
And then the show was here at the
At the Stanford Museum, but then he copied it for the
Museum.
Smithsonian. So it was, it was fun for him. Flattery is the greatest,
Yes.
blah, blah.
And on a personal level, did you belong to any of the Jewish organizations in Stamford?
Well, I became,
Were you active in Hadassah?
I was in Brandeis, and for Brandeis I got Hershon Topin, his gardens, and his wife, who had just married him. I had a friend who was a lecturer at the Metropolitan in art history, Britisher from Cambridge, blah, blah, blah. He came and lectured in front of all the sculptors, and his wife went on the tour because she didn't know anything about them. She had just married him. It was great. It was a lot of fun.
Right.
Yeah, I was active in Brandeis, and then I joined the Pound Hadassah. It's because it's closer to my
Yes,
house. It's
yeah.
right up the road, and I was active there. I
Okay.
was their program chairman.
And anything else related to Judaism that you want to share with us that you did here in Stanford?
Well, I did a little programming for the Jewish Historical Society.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
That's what I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
You asked me, do I have time?
Yes, you have a
You asked
time,
me,
yeah.
when we spoke, I said, what are we going to talk about? Because I hadn't filled out the blank, and you said, well, what are your interests? What are your prime interests? So I was thinking about it at 4 o'clock this morning. My prime interests, besides my family, have been programming and travel. So I'll start with the programming. There was always a method to my madness, and I think this was subconscious. I don't think I realized it. Years ago, when I was Junior Hadassah president, to boost the membership, I got all the eligible single guys in Rochester to give talks, with one exception. I got Sal Linowitz, who I always thought would become the first Jewish president. He had been president of Xerox. He didn't make president, but he was the ambassador to Latin America and Israel. He was the only one that wasn't, but he was great. Okay, and so the reason I did that was programming to boost membership. Then after I went on a trip to Israel, they, because it was kind of odd that anybody had gone that early on, and by 1950, because the state had just been established in 48. So they had me lecturing all over Rochester and Western New York, and my mission here was to boost Aliyah and tourism for Israel. So before I had left for Israel, I had worn this beautiful blue dress to a dance, and everybody in town, we all looked at it 20 times before one of us bought it. Everybody remembered the dress. So I said, in the talk, I would key at certain places. Remember when I wore that blue dress? Well, the national dance of Israel is not the hor, it's a tango. And I wore that dress 39 times in Israel. P.S. Eight junior Hadassah girls made Aliyah to Israel. Okay, and then the next thing, I don't know what I had in mind with, I was very appreciative of the Jewish Historical Society because I thought it was the only really cultural thing in Stanford. So then I became privileged to be program chairman, and I don't know if I really had a mission, but I guess what I was maybe doing was underlying our historical memory and also showing that with Jews, our mission, our way has always been living well has always been our best, has been our revenge. Now with the Stanford Historical Society, there are 3 programs that I remember the most. One was, I had David Bessalelli, whose father was the chief rabbi of Mashad, Iran. He spoke. And incidentally, for my Hadassah, this was a wild coincidence. The night that, it was Purim, the night that Khomeini resigned, David Bessalelli spoke on his experience in Iran, which is Persia, for my Hadassah. Okay, that's an aside. But in the other program that I remembered that I was very struck with and very touched by was I had Dory Laub of Yale. He founded the Fortunoff Archives that interviews the Holocaust survivors. And what really, really moved me, he had done a PBS documentary. Those PBS survivors who were on that documentary showed up. Wouldn't you think they would have been sicker? Apparently he had a fan club. They were so crazy about him. They came just to be with him and to come to the lecture. They came.
So that was here in Stanford?
Yeah, they came all the way from New Haven, many of them. It was amazing. And the other thing, something happened last week that this reminded me about that Calcutta brunch. We had a Jews of Calcutta kosher brunch at Tandoori Restaurant in Stanford. And Copeland Marks, who has wrote many ethnic cookbooks, was the raconteur, chef, etc. And he died, unfortunately. He was such a dream of a man. He died 2 weeks later and had this wild obit in the New York Times. And one thing, my children were privileged to drive him back to Brooklyn Heights, and this man was very, very concerned about the way many restaurateurs were treating the immigrant labor. That was one thing about him. But the other day, I was at my daughter's in Park Slope, and she said, Mom, I have she's decluttering. It's a family mission. And she said, Mom, I have a bunch of Jewish books, that you can have. And she didn't realize it, and I didn't realize it. She had Jew in the Lotus by Roger Kamenetz. Well, what had happened is that morning that we had the brunch, he spoke for the Judaic Studies of UConn, and luckily they weren't giving him lunch. And I happened to speak to him. I said, oh, well, would you like to come to the Indian brunch that we're having? And he was thrilled. So I have to put on my glasses for and read to you. When the New York Times had, the obit was in about the New York Times about Copeland Marks, he wrote, he had attended the event. He wrote that Marx, for me, personally deepened the connection between Hindus and Jews, and for that I'm grateful. Now, I hadn't read the book either because they were sleeping the other day. I started opening the book, and what the book is about, the Dalai Lama got together with, this is the book, got together with the Jews because he thought he wanted to learn our trick for surviving. And he chronicles this. He went, Kamenetz and a bunch of other prominent Jewish leaders went to Tibet to meet with him and here. So I was very moved about that. So that's my story about program. About travel, I've got one story I've got to tell you.
Okay.
I had a cousin, a British.
A short one.
Yeah, I'll do it as short as I can. And my time's up? Okay, I'll do it as quickly as I can. I had a British cousin who came after he had been a major in Egypt, which is unusual for a Jew, and he came here via the Marshall Plan on a productivity tour to Rochester. And I thought he was a big phony because he had this phony accent. It was his real accent, of course. He was British. So I go into New York. I had to go on a buying trip for my mother's furniture store, and I go into the club car. I'm sitting in the club car. This guy comes in and comes towards me, and I said, oh my gosh, what are you doing here? Well, what had happened is he said to his friends, I'm going into the club car and pick up the first woman I meet. And it was He went back and said, it's my cousin. They said, yeah. So anyway, we became friends for the rest of our lives, and his wife always loved the story, and we went back and forth. And every year we'd go to London. We'd go to Israel, but we really went to London every 4th of July. And that was our big destination. But as far as travel, our budget was education for the kids and travel to the mothers. End of story.
Well, to sum up your life here in Stamford, have you found a change?
Oh, tremendous change. You mean as far as,
From when you first came here?
well, Jewish culturally and culturally, period. When we moved, we moved here because of the Stanford Museum. Because we looked for a city that had some culture in case we couldn't get into New York.
Right.
But my husband did budget one day in New York for me so I could get in.
But as far as the Judaism here,
Yeah, that's
has
what
it changed now?
Oh, absolutely. Once
For
Federation.
better?
Oh, absolutely. But the Historical Society, I think, to me, was the best thing that ever happened to Stanford.
Now, do you think that the Jewish community is friendly here, or better than it was when you first came in the 60s?
Yeah, I do.
You
I
do?
do. Yes,
That's good.
yeah.
So you have many Jewish friends here in
I don't
Stanford?
know about many, but I have some
Well, you
very
have some,
significant
right.
friends, like
Right.
everybody.
But do you still belong to the fellowship or to any other?
Oh, no, we left the fellowship.
Okay.
And, no, I'm unaffiliated now because I can't sit and I can't stand. So I go where the kids are when I can. One of my daughters gives, they're called Midrashim. She does that very often at the her Park Slope Synagogue.
No.
That synagogue either place. Oh, and I go to the gay synagogue in New York. Those are the best services in the world.
Okay.
With my daughter Sarah.
Right, yes, that's very nice.
Yeah.
Well, we thank you very much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. I didn't know what to expect.
Well, good.
Any pictures?
I didn't know what you were going to do. You said you have some things you'd like to give us?
Well, the most important thing I didn't bring up,
Oh, go
and I
ahead.
wanted to send it to her. Oh, the letter.
The
You got
letter,
the
you
letter.
gave me the letter.
Oh. A friend, I was talking to a friend on the phone one day, and I said, "Is it a pity we're going to lose the JCC to the Catholics?" And she said, "Oh, I'll tell Daddy." So Daddy gave $1 million to the center with the understanding that the center had to match the $1 million, and he went to the bankers and told them to lower the interest. It was Tandit, and Naomi Cookie Heller Tandit. And what was so wonderful about her was one day she called me up and she said, I told you this, Emilyn. She said, "Can you believe they called me and asked me to be on the board?" I thought that was so amazing because here, you know, they were so just out of goodness of their heart
Right.
did that mitzvah. Did you show the letter to?
I
Yeah,
did.
you've got the letter for the archives.
Okay, so that would be
But
one
she
of the items.
remembered it differently. It was on the phone. It was on the phone.
Right. Now, you have any other items that you wanted to give us, or?
Well, I didn't make it, because I just found it. I found a whole article that I had written about the Copeland marks, and I have to Xerox,
Okay.
because, I was wondering if the Stanford Jewish Historical Society does historical memories of Stanford, I'd like to publish something about that, about the Copeland Marks obit. It's kind of interesting. I don't know where it came out of. I don't know where it flew out
Would
of.
that be something?
Flew into my hands. Oh, and you know what, another one that was funny, another program I did one from Ziegfeld to Zionism for my Hadassah. My girlfriend had an aunt or a cousin who had been a Ziegfeld girl. But they were great Zionists. And she was great, she was adorable.
That is great. So the main thing, as far as the, what you want to give us is this letter.
Yeah, I don't know what else I
And
had here.
also,
I didn't even mention that.
Do you do art or you collect it?
No, we collected it.
Okay.
It started by accident, like all collections.
Well, would you like any of the pictures on the DVD?
Well, I'll tell you the most significant, oh, you know, that one a neighbor did.
Which,
He did he needed it as a, for a catalog, because he was promoting his art. He did the Rockefellers and everything. The one of Debbie.
Debbie?
Yeah,
The
he
neighbor
just
did that?
yeah, her head and the body. She said, I'm going to pose for my autograph. He's around the corner. Kimberly Prins the third is blind now, unfortunately. Yeah.
And then what about this?
Go ahead.
Okay, I consider this the most significant because many of the paintings that folk art paintings that we collected since the 50s are both painterly, have social commentary, and sometimes humor. Now this one is definitely social commentary because he shows all the people, the beggars and the military with limbs missing in front of the church looking for alms. And then the Jewish comment is that he paints the priest as a ghoul. And then Edythe, this folk artist, Zelig Tepper, who started to paint when he was 69 and legally blind, he throws in the Stella Marketplace. Oh, and probably the man with a cart is peddling water. Now that has a story that relates to Emilyn Cogan. My daughter and Scott Cogan were very dear friends in high school. And one day, Scott was here and he asked me about one of the other paintings. And he said, what's that all about? I said, well, they had to peddle water in the shtetl because the place where they got the water, the wells, were miles away. So these peddlers would go get the water and then peddle it in the shtetling. So he said, oh, isn't that interesting? Because my grandfather, that's what he did in Europe. And the interesting part is, the boy whose grandfather peddled water in Europe ended up at Harvard. Oh, that one was it was hung between a Utillo and a Picasso. It was at the Stanford Museum. They went crazy about that one. The one straight ahead.
This one?
Yeah. These are international in scope.
How long have you been collecting?
Since the 50s. I thought I had done this, that one day when I was speaking with Naomi Tandit Heller, I mentioned that I felt terrible that the center was going to be lost to the Catholics, and she said, well, I'll tell Daddy, and Daddy subsequently gave $1 million to be matched by the center and got the banks to lower the interest. The other friend that I wanted to mention was Joyce Leszek, because we moved here because of her, because she had a realtor in the driveway when we came to visit. And I wanted to make a very, very strong note and appreciation for what she had done for children with learning disabilities. She made many innovations in the Stanford public school system.